Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positive here at Costas. We're in Dundalk doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. It's the Gold Rush Sevens doublers. We're here for the Orioles and the Yankees, but we're not going to talk about the Orioles and the Yankees today. I think we're going to talk about just in general baseball because we're in the middle of a season to remember thus far, and we've talked day by day about pitching and bullpen and reinforcements and trades and all that stuff. Luke Jones is here. It's all brought to you by our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping our water crystal clear at home. Can do that for you if you have well water, if you have water needs, get that orange water going on. Don't drink that. Call my friends at Liberty Pure Solutions. Let them fix that for you like they fixed it for me. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, including the Merritt Boulevard Jiffy Lube right around the corner. We're appreciative of all of our sponsors. Luke Jones has made it all the way to his ancestral homeland of, well, that would be Essex, but it is Dundalk. He does have relatives on the east side. He is Baltimore Luke. He is our insider for all things football, baseball, Orioles, Ravens. He is the guy they let in. They don't let the Venezuelan guy in, but that's all right. They'll be back next week. You get to cover some baseball. In the meantime, we get to watch it at the bar here. So we try to do these conversations here so they're not dated about, like, the potential brawl the other night or Aaron Judge or the Yankees. I wanted to make fun of the Astros as cheaters and all of that. And I said, well, you know, Louis the last living Hall of Famer, and I mentioned that to you. And you said to me, dude, we got to talk about WIllie Mays. We haven't talked about WIllie Mays at all. And I'm like, yeah. All right, we're losing them all, right? I mean, when Louis the oldest living Hall of Famer, it's probably a good day for you and me to talk about the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to talk about it a little bit. One of the things that, with WIllie Mays passing this week, obviously Major League Baseball doing the game at Rickwood Field and the Negro League's history, and something that just popped in my mind, and it's not specifically related to that, but certainly talking about living legends who are now no longer living with us. I thought back to Brooks Robinson late last September. I mean, it was such a strange time because there was so much excitement about the Orioles on the verge of clinching the division. They wore number 5. The team honored him. There wasn't anything about that I was unhappy about or anything like that. But it was just so brief. And you think about other instances where someone passes away in the offseason, someone passes away early in the season, and you wear that jersey number on your shoulder for the entire season. And for Brooks, it was so brief, and I miss him, and I just think the people.
I found the final picture I took with him when I was doing the documentary. I saw Brooks coming into the football stadium. He was with Ron Shapiro, and he's Brooks. He was getting out. He's wearing a checkered shirt, going to a football game, and he saw me, and he said to me, it's the third time I'd seen him out. He was like, I owe you. I'm supposed to come on the show, Nestor. I'm going to come on. I owe you one. I said, Brooks, you owe me nothing. And I took a selfie of myself, and Brooks is behind me signing an autograph for a kid.
There you go.
So I have the last picture I have. It'll make me cry. I found it, and I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't going to put it in the documentary or whatever. But I found it, and I pulled it aside, and I said, there's going to come a day where I'm going to share my last picture with Brooks Robinson, Because I didn't even take a picture with him. He didn't even know. He was signing on. I just took the picture over the shoulders, cool. And I'm like, I think I put it up online because I'm like, I ran into Brooks this morning. It's a good day. Any day you run into Brooks, it's a good day, WIllie Mays carried that for other fan bases in other ways and for people of another race everywhere he went. And I don't mean to be flippant, and I don't mean to be a jerk. I had sort of forgotten he was alive. You know what I mean? Like,
he's 93.
I just didn't think about him being a living Hall of Famer anymore in that way.
Well, and I guess that's why I thought of Brooks here locally. But you think about WIllie Mays, what he means to the Bay Area, and what he did for the San Francisco Giants, as that was a franchise that came across the country. Moved from the Polo Grounds in New York to the West Coast. So,
and he was the guy that came from the Negro Leagues.
Literally. Right, exactly. Yeah. And you think about what he meant in New York and just 1950s baseball, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. And that era of baseball history, as someone who was born in the 80s and long after that occurred, there's a mythology to it. Right?
Romanticism.
There's such a transcendent feeling when it came to WIllie Mays. Mickey Mantle, I think, as well, but the thing that really strikes me about WIllie Mays, and he's one of my all-time favorite players. Never saw him play, never met him, anything like that.
I didn't know this about you. Okay, all right.
One of. I mean, I don't think I'm talking out of turn and saying that. I mean, you're talking about
See, when I collected baseball cards in the late 70s, early 80s, I was more likely to want an Aaron or a Clemente or a Mantle.
Mays would have been my guy from that era.
Okay.
And I think what's so amazing about him, and look, I'm not going to say anything here that's unique to any number of tributes or insights or just thoughts opining about Willie Mays, but you think about the greatest players of all time, or the players that are at least in that conversation, right? Babe Ruth played pre-Jackie Robinson, right? Pre-integration. So played against only white players. The great players of the Negro Leagues played against only contemporary black players, right? So there was always a sense of, what would Josh Gibson do against the greatest white players of that era? What would Babe Ruth have done against the greatest black players of that era? Fast forward to the modern day, and more specifically the 90s into the early 2000s, Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, we don't need to belabor the point. PEDs, steroids, all of the questions that's created that, kind of transitions right into any Hall of Fame discussion in today's day and age.
As to whether Barry Bonds is the greatest living baseball player.
But you think about this in terms of Willie Mays, played in the briefly played in the Negro Leagues, but played his entire career in the major leagues from the time he was 20 years old until playing to the point where he was with the Mets and falling down and not the guy that he was. And you look at the numbers, all the numbers, whether you're talking about the traditional counting stats, whether you want to talk about WAR, league-adjusted OPS, all the nerdy stats of today, all of that tells you Willie Mays was absolutely incredible. And as much as there was a mythical aura that he had, going back to the days of him being in Harlem playing stickball with kids on the street, buying them ice cream, and then heading to the Polo Grounds to play a game later that afternoon, I mean, everything about him is legitimate. When you look at it, never really heard any negative stories about him or him ever being standoffish with people or anything like that. And let's face it, growing up in that era and playing baseball in that era, I'm not even saying the word bitter, but you could certainly be guarded at the very least. And by all accounts, just a wonderful human being, but an amazing player. And I just think about whether you think the greatest ever is Ruth or Cobb or Josh Gibson or any players pre-Jackie Robinson, and then Willie Mays is in that conversation. I don't care whether you think he's the greatest or the second greatest or the third greatest. I don't think he's outside of the top three. I mean, let's just put it that way. And there's nothing that you can really say that's a caveat about his game. I mean, this is a guy who lost a year and a half to military, to being in the military, being drafted and all that. So just a remarkable career. And I saw something that was just absolutely ridiculous the other day. And I saw it on social media, but someone had put together the stats of Bryce Harper and Mookie Betts, two of the greatest players of the last 20 years, two surefire Hall of Famers at this point in time, right? Their numbers combined were still slightly lacking to Willie Mays. Close, but still lacking. And, of course, those guys are going to play many more years. But just that exercise.
Well, the body of work of their 20s, too. Right.
And you just think about
their next 10 years for those two guys are not going to be as good as the last 10.
We use the term five-tool player in baseball. No one in the history of the game. Now, we can debate Ruth, and okay, Ruth was a pitcher, and I'll hear that. No one in the history of the game better epitomizes a five-tool player than Willie Mays. There were others who had five tools, but there were still one or two of those tools where you'd say, okay, they were pretty good. Like Rickey Henderson had some years where he hit 20 home runs.
Sure.
But he wasn't a big home run power guy, of course. But Mays did it all, and he did it all at a really, really high level. So I just such an admiration for him as someone who considers myself a baseball historian. I mean, I was born in 1983. It was years after he was retired in the Hall of Fame already. But just whether it's seeing the clips from the 1950s, the catch, and
did you see the old timers catch in '81 in the New York? He played an old timers game.
I don't remember that.
Find a video of it. He made a basket catch in a Mets uniform at Shea Stadium in an old timers game. I believe it was '81, '82. Like Brooks famously had a home run one time at RFK Stadium. Mm-hmm. It was that era, but they weren't wearing those ALNL old time. He was wearing a Mets jersey. He was 51 years old.
Wow.
And he made a basket catch in left center field as a center fielder. On the run, he fell, and a bunch of guys came out of the Ed Crane pool, and some other old-timers came up, scraped him up or whatever. But I even saw that show up on my timeline. And then there's just like the pop culture part of him being in Bewitched.
Yeah.
You know, and like what stature a baseball player of that era would have in the 50s and 60s, where football players weren't really celebrities yet until Namath came along in the 70s, right? And you mentioned Willie Mays. I never saw him play in person, obviously. I did see Hank Aaron play in person. So there's a point of that. And I sort of remember when Clemente died. I was 5 years old. My dad loved Clemente, even though he didn't love the Pirates, but he loved Clemente. 73 World Series is the first World Series I watched as a kid. I remember it pretty well. I was rooting for the Mets because they were playing the A's, and I hated the A's because the A's beat the Orioles, right? And the A's had Reggie Jackson and Charlie Finley and all the things my father hated, their handlebar mustaches, all that. So our family that year, and look, the Mets had just beaten the Orioles in '69. I was not a part of that. But my dad didn't like the Mets either. So this was like the Mets and the A's playing each other was...
It's written for a lightning bolt.
It was bad. But I took a loving to Les Grands Orange. Rusty Staub was the best player on the 73 Mets. And Seaver was there, Kuzman, those guys. But this was the end for Willie Mays. So, I do remember Willie Mays playing in that era where you said falling over himself. And, you know, my father would always say a shadow of his former self, you know what I mean, about Willie Mays, that I saw him play at the end of the end of the end, this broken down. It would be like saying I saw Eddie Murray play for the Orioles at the end, except worse. A lot worse, you know what I mean? So that was my Willie Mays thing, and maybe that factored into how I felt about him, that he was an old man when I saw him play or whatever. And I know how great he was. I know 660. I know all of that, right? I'm a baseball guy. But his passing this week, the weirdest part about it for me was I was like, I didn't realize he was still alive because baseball, I guess, does a poor job. Everybody knew Ted Williams was alive at the end of his life because they paraded him around and he was a part of the sport and he was a part of the thing.
Right.
Everybody here knew Brooks was alive because Brooks showed up here. Brooks was a part. Maybe in San Francisco was that way, but Willie Mays was – I haven't heard Willie Mays' name in 10 years in any sort of way to know he was alive or to hear him feted, which is why it was a little weird for you 48 hours after his death to say, we're doing a Willie Mays segment at Costa. I didn't know he was your favorite. I did not know.
I mean, like I said, not my favorite, but as far as just, I love baseball history. There's such a to your point, romantic, mythical almost.
Well, I felt that way about Ted Williams in '99 when I met him, right?
But I think so much, part of what you just laid out, and I wouldn't disagree with it, San Francisco, West Coast. We know that there's always East Coast bias when we talk about sports. I mean, right down to us complaining about the time that games start at 9 o'clock Eastern time.
Absolutely.
But I think what was the shame of it, but I also think it's going to lead to a pretty cool tribute, I would expect, was I think there had been designs on him being at Rickwood Field for the Negro League game that they were doing this week. And I think he had actually put out a statement. I want to say it was Monday that he couldn't make it, and he passed away the following day. So now, did he have a publicist or someone put that together? I mean, it doesn't.
I'm sure
really,
the Giants.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. But I mean, just
it was his health just a little bit longer. He would have appeared. Right.
Yeah. I just think when we look at the history of sports, I mean, you use the word, we romanticize it. We tend to remember it in a way that's not exactly how it was.
He's the real thing.
But I think he was the real thing, and I even think back to the catch. And there's been lots of debate as far as whether that's truly the greatest defensive play in baseball history. I mean, I remember the catch Jim Edmonds made 20-some years ago.
I saw Verdugo the other night.
Gary Matthews Jr., former Oriole, had that unbelievable catch. But I think back to the catch, and I wanted to double-check because I knew Russ Hodges was on the call, but it was Jack Brickhouse, calling it for NBC. The famous call of the catch in the 54 series and, way back there, way back. And he gasps. He can't even speak for a moment. And then he says, a catch that must have been an optical illusion to a lot of people. That's where you look at something and say, okay, that's the contemporary commentary in real time. That's what someone was saying as that happened, and he called it an optical illusion. That catch was legit. Anyone who knows what the dimensions were at the Polo Grounds, which was 475 to dead center. I mean, such a
cavern.
Anyone who's listening, just Google it. Look it up on Wikipedia and just look at what the dimensions of the Polo Grounds were. I mean, down the line, it was nothing, but center field went on forever. And for him to do that, and I believe it was Larry Doby at second base, he caught that ball, and he was so far away from the infield, Larry Doby probably had a chance to tag up and score from second base. That's always been the story. But he catches the ball and in one motion spins and throws it back to the infield. It hits the cutoff man and keeps the guy from scoring. So, that's one of the legendary plays of baseball. And again, it's kind of like Ruth at Wrigley Field. Did he call the shot or not? And there tends to be a lot of sentiments out there that didn't actually happen because Charlie Root probably would have put it in his ear. And Charlie Root even said that. It was the pitcher for the Cubs. So we always have these historic, classic moments in baseball, and I think the catch was very legit. And whether it was the greatest of all time or on the short list, for him to do that in that setting at still a very early stage of his career, and he had missed a couple, basically a year and a half, being serving in the military. So for him to be on that stage and to do something like that at such a young age, and then to be in the limelight for another 20 years, almost 20 years after that, crazy, amazing career that I don't think there's hyperbole out there that you would call it hyperbole. I think he's truly as great, as amazing as all the stories, all the numbers. It all checks out. I don't think there's a way to say that Willie Mays was overrated. And again, with a lot of it having to do with, I think he was the 10th player of color to play in the major leagues. I mean, this was a few years after Jackie Robinson, and he was the best of that era. There's no question.
I was only in a room with him once that I'm aware of. That and I remember it pretty vividly. I was in San Francisco. I was with Julio, having lunch, and he was dropping me off for whatever. I said Game 3 of the World Series in 2002 in San Francisco, and it was cold. It was wet. It was it was damp. It was San Francisco. And he dropped me off at the gate, and because the World Series starts earlier there, right? It's a 5 o'clock game time there, so you get to the ballpark at noon, right? For would be 3 o'clock here, and I had an early lunch with Julio. I'll never forget this. And he dropped me off at the door, and he was coming to the game that night, and I had my press pass. It was actually the day I met Joe Madden. I wound up sitting in the dugout, the Angels dugout, with Joe Madden that day. And as I walked into the stadium that day, a car pulled up at the press gate, and 3 guys got out of it, and it was Willie Mays, Willie McCovey with Canadian crutches, and Juan Marichal.
Wow.
And I walked into the press gate with them, and Mays was wearing that World Series jacket he threw the first pitch at. That night, Tony Bennett sang "I Left My Heart in San Francisco," and I had Tony Bennett on the show. I put him on with Haney that afternoon because it was early in the afternoon at that time to be out there. And I saw the picture because I thought the day he died, I'm like, I know I met Willie Mays that day, and I know he was wearing a World Series jacket, but I didn't take a picture with him. And I remembered him being with Marichal, and I saw that picture and was came back to life 22 years later. I was I was there because they're wearing what they were wearing that day as I remembered it out on the field. And I thought, what a fool I was to not go up and take a picture with Willie Mays or say hello to Willie Mays, because we walked into the press gate together. It was like walking with royalty. I mean, there was 3 of them and a couple of handlers, and we all walked in together. And there was nobody there. It wasn't crowded or anything, but it was you remember that. And then you remember it on the day that Willie Mays dies, because I haven't thought about Willie Mays in 22 years, to be honest with you.
It's funny that you mentioned that story, because I thought this had been John Shea, baseball writer for the San Francisco Chronicle. I don't think it is, because I pulled up his Twitter page and did not see it. It was a story from that same World Series. I believe it was in Anaheim, though.
Okay.
Willie Mays shows up. He's at the security gate where press are going in, and this is 2002. There's security. It's not maybe as crazy as it is today, but this was still a post-9/11 world, all that. But he didn't have a badge. The security guard wouldn't let him in. All these media are bringing up, this is Willie Mays.
This is Willie Mays. Let him in. Right.
And apparently John Miller was there. Of course, the great John Miller. So much affinity for him, growing up listening to him on Orioles broadcasts. He said, the catch, the catch in 1950, this is him. This is the greatest ball player of all time. The security guard was completely unmoved, so they had to wait.
But he doesn't have a pass.
He doesn't have a pass. But whoever had told the story, and again, I can't remember. It may have been
John Miller telling it would be hilarious.
Yeah, right. Someone had just made.
If I ever have John Miller on again, I'm going to ask him about this.
Sure. But they said that he ended up holding court with the media and basically did kind of an impromptu, kind of sort of press conference. Said he was so gracious, was not impatient whatsoever, and just they said all these.
I'll get in.
All these baseball scribes were there just, I mean, think about this. You're covering the World Series, and Willie Mays is going to be there because the Giants are playing. But to have that kind of impromptu encounter, and it's just the hilarity of the security guard being like, nope, you don't have a pass. I don't care if you're the greatest baseball player of all time.
Well, the craziest thing about me seeing this picture, the picture I put up on my Facebook is Willie Mays throwing out the first pitch wearing the World Series jacket. And I looked and I see McCovey in the Canadian, and it's like – I remember walking in the press gate, and it was like the same picture of the three guys wearing the same thing. And I don't know, it's a point-in-time thing where I guess the one time in your life you meet Willie Mays, you don't forget it. I was never in a room with Mantle. You know what I mean? I'm thinking I was in a room one time with Hank Aaron. I told the story when he died. He was visiting Ozzie Newsome in the press room at the top of the Georgia Dome, and it was like a preseason game. Like it might have been the day that Vic broke his ankle, or Dallas Thomas broke him in half.
Right.
It might have been that game because it was very sparsely attended, and Hank was literally he and Ozzie were friends, real good friends,
very close.
And so they were just like visiting, and they were sitting in the cafeteria just having a meal, and it was Hank Aaron there, and I had a camera and everything, and I didn't think Mr. Aaron, will you take a picture or whatever. I think I took a picture with Billy White Shoes Johnson that day, crazy enough, in the elevator shaft. But you remember when you meet someone like that. It's why people stand in line to get autographs. That's why all of that. But it's even more so when you rando bump into somebody and never the rest of your life, and the day they die, you're like, man, that made such an
I'd handled that differently.
Yeah, it's such an impact on you. You're like, wow, that was Willie Mays. You know? So,
well, I mean, I told this story several years ago when Frank.
And then you meet Reggie Jackson, you wish you didn't.
Yeah, right. I mean, and there are some of those examples, sure, but everything I heard about Willie Mays, and that's why I wanted to bring up Brooks, because
Brooks was our Willie Mays.
Everyone had an amazing experience with Brooks Robinson. But, I mentioned this a few years ago when he passed away, but Frank Robinson, it was Fan Fest going into the 94 season. My dad and I were there. If you recall, you probably don't, but they actually announced the signing of Lee Smith at Fan Fest.
I was there at the press conference.
We encountered Frank Robinson. It must not have been 15 minutes before it was being announced. It was in this random hallway. Like I don't know if we were lost or trying to find a bathroom or whatever it was.
The convention center had all those halls.
And you have to keep in mind, I was 10 going on 11 years old at this point in time. I was a real young guy. He couldn't have been nicer to me. And I know there haven't always been great
You had a good Frank interaction,
but I had a great one. And he was more than willing to sign an autograph. Not he, not my dad, nor I had a pen. So, not that the autograph itself was the memory there.
Frank rung me up on a 3-2 pitch that was low and away on Schmuck calling balls and strikes in the media game.
Yeah.
So
I remember you saying. That.
I didn't dislike Frank. I came to terms with how Frank was going to be.
Right.
The last thing Frank ever said to me, I was in L.A. at Camelback Ranch, which is their facility they share with the White Sox. A brand new facility at the time. My friend Dennis Mannion was running the Dodgers. This is when Frank McCourt and his wife from Baltimore. The only other Evelyn I've ever known in my life was the secretary for Jamie McCourt was Evelyn Eller. So there's your second Evelyn reference this week for you.
I like it.
And I was in L.A., and I was at that point putting together the book that I never finished on Baltimore leadership. I interviewed Frank Cush, Jimmer, all sorts of people I sat with for long stretches about Baltimore and coaching and what inspired them to be a leader of men or women, depending. And I wanted to get to Frank. He was on the list. He was a manager of the Orioles. It wasn't because he was great or he was a Hall of Famer. It was because he was a manager of the Orioles. I was only interviewing leaders. I interviewed Sam Perlazzo, people that had led things. I was looking for football coaches, basketball coaches, hockey coaches, all of that. And Frank came down the hallway, and I was in the front office of a spring training facility, which is very nice at Camelback Ranch. Their front office, that little thing they built in Sarasota is nice. Camelback Ranch is a mansion. And I was waiting on Dennis, and there was things happening, and we were getting tickets. It was stupid. It was March 10th. It was, Cactus Baseball. And Frank came down the hallway, and I saw him, and he saw me, and I wanted to introduce him to my wife. I'm proud to have a new wife and like all that. It's probably 2007 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
He had never met my wife, and he came down the hallway, and it was so frank. Nestor, I ain't talking to you. You know I ain't talking to you. That's the last thing he said to me. Nestor, you know I ain't talking to you.
Yeah.
But he didn't dislike me. It was kind of shtick.
Right.
His shtick.
And I've heard that.
Was to give me a hard time. But he wasn't going to sit and do my book with me.
Sure.
He never did my show as long as he knew me. He did do my show. He did my show when he was the cop for Major League Baseball, when he was meeting out the fines.
Right, yeah.
When
Discipline,
he was
yep.
disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
He did my national show after some stupid brawl thing when Gunnar Henderson charged the mound instead of didn't charge the mound, and they had to meet out fines. Frank came on and did 7. And, Frank didn't dislike me. Frank was just irascible. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
I think Reggie Jackson is a real prick. I think Frank was just tired. I don't know what else to say. I never held it against Frank, but I wish I had better stories than the stories I have about Frank. But I really do.
But some of this also goes back to what I had mentioned about Mays and him being so friendly to people.
I'll say this about Louis.
You think back of
Louis
what they
is not the
encountered,
friendliest guy in the world.
What they dealt with in that era. I mean, it's just.
And Louis didn't speak the language, and Louis got hazed, and Louis got picked on by Drabowski and all these guys. Like in the real world, I think Louis, to all of his life, felt slighted. He was smaller. He was picked on. Didn't speak the language. He sold tickets. He didn't get paid for that. He was reserved like Brooks and Steve Carlton and everybody else.
Right.
So I just think there's something about players of that era watching, I don't know, Juan Soto run into third baseman and knock him out, and they're making $400 million, and they don't care. I think there's a real distance between all of the players of that era, Palmer included, and the players of this era, and toughness, dedication to the game, money, all of that. The old guard has a bone to pick, but Willie Mays got thousands of dollars to sign his name for 50 years of his life. So did my cousin. So
Sure. But I mean, this goes back to, part of the mystique for Willie Mays is, again, those clips of him being in Harlem playing stickball with a bunch of kids. Literally in a game.
But he didn't take the piss when they wouldn't let him into the stadium in Anaheim in 2002
And that's the
either.
thing. Like, he was chill. He was chill about it.
I think Frank would have lost his mind and said, do you know who I am?
I'm not even saying that he didn't have a right to be ticked off there, but because it's Willie Mays. But he, by this account that I saw, and again, it was on Twitter somewhere. It was a legit. It might have been Bob Nightingale. I'm not sure, but just spoke to what kind of person he was. And when you think about that, again, you think about the era in which he played, where there are no caveats. There are no buts about when he played. I mean, he was, game had been integrated. It's considered one of the great eras of Major League history, and his numbers were just unbelievable. You're just
get the back of the bubblegum card.
There's nothing about it where you say, oh, okay, well, he didn't really run that well, or he wasn't a great defensive player, or he had too much swing and miss in his game, or he didn't hit a lot of home runs, or he did everything. And he did everything at such an elite level. I mean, again, anytime we talk about a five-tool player, it wasn't just a five-tool player. He excelled in all five. So
you may run like Mays, but
you know what? You made mention of the pop culture
Willie
references.
Mays Hayes,
Major League and Willie Mays Hayes, which is that and Bull Durham. I love Field of Dreams as well. Obviously that's more romantic, but
I haven't seen Field of Dreams yet.
You have not seen Field of Dreams?
Go ahead,
man.
Did I not in front of you?
How have we
did
known
I
each
not
other
in
for
front of
15
you with Glenn
years?
Powell admit that I hadn't seen Top Gun? Did I not do that? And now he's the biggest star in the world.
But I know.
Does your sister?
I know it's funny,
sister
right?
thinks it's cool.
I thought about that because he was in that comedy that
So was my
rom-com
wife.
that came out not long ago, and I thought about that. But wait a second, though. I know you're not a big movie guy, so I wasn't shocked that you hadn't seen Top Gun.
Oh, dude, don't do this to me.
How have you not seen Field of Dreams?
Moeller did
Even
this.
if you told me that you
every time I
didn't
told
like
Moeller that, he would say, "Let's
can't
stop the
believe
show.
it.
You're going to my house and
I
watching
can't
it right
believe
now."
that. I just watched it again 2 weeks ago for probably the 300th time in my life.
You may find this hard to believe.
I got teary-eyed again at the end.
You may find this hard to believe, but you were in Arlington last year when we were being discriminated against for media. I don't have the romanticism for baseball that you have.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know.
Well, but again,
if the Whistler called you 6 weeks ago and spoke to you the way I was spoken to, you know, and that went on for 20 years.
Understood.
The romanticism of baseball.
But this movie came out long before
that
happened.
I can't romanticize baseball. It's not romantic to me,
and that's fine,
in the way it is to you.
I'm just surprised you hadn't seen that movie. I was just surprised by that.
The worst part for me is I bought into all that romanticism.
I didn't know that.
And which leads us to our next topic, and then we're going to go watch the game. We're Costas, Lucas here. We're trying to stay away from all things Orioles, Yankees, Astros, so we do a meaningful segment. All courtesy of our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I have the Gold Rush Sevens doublers to give away. Our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions keeping our water clean, as well as Jiffy Lube. We are at Pappas on Tuesday. Luke will not be there. He will be minding to baseball and the Cleveland Guardians and all that stuff this week. All right, so while we're on romanticism, we did WIllie Mays, Aparicio, we ragged on Frank, we got Yankees, Orioles, all that stuff. And maybe we'll have another conversation about. Maybe we won't, because we're really close to this, and you're making babies and having vacations and whatnot.
I'm not making babies.
Family's making babies. All-star.
I just want to clarify that for everyone.
All-star game, all-star value, all-star. It's in Arlington this year. All of the Orioles brass wearing their little funny ties with little heads on them, and I see that they're sort of like incenting people to vote, which is weird.
Yeah.
I go back to ballot stuffing and my dad punching a little cards for Aparicio, and I did all that.
I miss taking out my dad's keys and
yeah. That was the way we did it.
I love that.
Yeah, and
that's long gone now.
Yeah. Where are you on because we're going to hear a little bit of next coming 2-3 weeks. We have a lot of guys that are worthy. I mean,
Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Corbin Burns, I think they're all locks at this point.
Okay.
Whether they're going to start or not, I mean, it depends on the voting, but I think they're locks. I think Jordan Westberg has a shot. I think Ryan Mountcastle has a shot just because look around the American
League.
It's not
Thomas Palmeiro. It's not
we're a long ways away from that. So this is going to be interesting, and, I don't know if there's the juice for the All-Star. Certainly not the juice there was 20 or 30 years ago, but that's every sport at this point in time. I mean, dare we even say what the Pro Bowl has become? Anyone who's tuned into the NBA All-Star game in recent years, I still think baseball.
Do they still play the NHL? I don't even know when they do it. Yeah, it's like.
I can't speak with any. I don't watch regular.
Well, this is
season.
the hardest part of getting, like, you and I right now, 3 weeks out, we're talking about it once. You and I are serious cats. We won't talk about it. The day that they announce it, you'll have a kiss on the cheek and there'll be a text and a thing or whatever. Yeah. But it's not – and we're trying to get the All-Star game here at some point,
sure.
And I guess we will. I just – when we talk about WIllie Mays or Frank, part of it is how many All-Star games and the All-Star games they shined on and the game meant something. And once you get a relevant team with these great players, you don't need to tell me Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson are All-Stars and give them 2 at-bats in some meaningless game. The romanticism's going – this is the romanticism of the game being depleted to some degree.
It's depleted. However, I will still maintain – of the 4 major sports in their All-Star games, it's the closest thing that actually still looks like that sport. Now, my biggest pet peeve in recent years has been the uniforms.
Oh, right.
How we've gone from what was always such a, I don't want to say beautiful, that would be too much.
Well, if you pull up the 78 National League All-Star, it's beautiful. I'll tell you right now.
The contrast in uniform, jersey to jersey, team to team, American League, National League, one team wearing the home whites, the other team wearing the road grays, or if you get into the 70s and the Pirates are wearing their alternates and different stuff like that. But now that they've done these generic American National League uniforms, I hate it. I really hate it. That would be the first thing I would try to fix.
This picture shows up on my timeline from time to time.
Right.
Look at that 78 All-Star. Look at how good Sparky Anderson looks in there.
Right.
Look at how good Dave Parker looks in there, and Pops. I don't like those guys,
I'll modernize it a little bit and say, show me the team photo of 1993, and I can hear the fans at Camden Yards booing all the Blue Jays coming out from the dugout, right? And Cito Gaston, what happened in the ninth inning of that game, obviously. But, so much of this, and we talked about this when interleague play rolled in a couple weeks ago. I forget who they were even playing. The Orioles were even playing at the time. Might have been Atlanta. And we said that, that mystique of AL versus NL and the novelty of that, I mean, that's so far gone at this point. I mean, we're at a point now where you play every team in baseball, at least for one series, every year now. So you're never going to recapture.
Zach Wheeler versus Gunnar Henderson in an All-Star game doesn't mean as much.
Right, because you saw it a month earlier. So now, that's not to say that I certainly wouldn't want to see it go away. I certainly want to see it become what the Pro Bowl has become. Where at this point, it's just like, just name the teams and be done with it. I mean, really? Like, we're really doing this at this point in time? Like, but it's the only sport now that kind of still feels like baseball.
Well, we have real all-stars here now, too. So.
Well, and that helps, too. I mean, obviously. But in terms of, I think back to, what was it, 94 when the National League won, and that there had been a drought, and them beating the AL. I mean, back in the 70s, the NL won for years and years. I mean, you don't have any of that anymore. I mean, not even close to that. One, the leagues play each other in the regular season. And
then they wear their pajamas in the middle of the game.
Well, putting that aside, the player movement now is just so frequent. I mean, most of these guys will end up having played in the AL and the NL over the course of their career. So that part of it, there's nothing you can do to recapture that. I mean, I know they've pondered altering the format.
If they really want to do something, here's my idea, okay? Make me Rob Manfred. When
the
the All-Star
US
game
versus the
happens,
world.
They wear throwback 78 uniforms every year. That's what they should do. Wear throwback uniforms. Whoever's with the Padres, I'll tell you right now, Manny Machado should have on whatever Winfield was wearing that night right now. I'll tell you right now.
I really like that.
How about Ellie De La Cruz wearing they have similar, but they wear their pajamas in Cincinnati.
But in terms of anything you could do to recapture that mystique, I just don't think you're going to have that. I've heard some people talk about, could you do North America versus the world and kind of do an all-star game that way?
Well, that's a hockey idea.
I'm not completely opposed to it, but at the same time, I just think we're chasing a ghost. I think that's where we are with the all-star game. And like I said, I'd still much prefer. It's not even close.
Listen, don't say that next year when Mr. Rubenstein is lobbying to bring the 29 All-Star game.
I think the event is still, if it's in your city, I think the event is still very attractive.
Well, I hope we live long enough.
But the idea, like, for example, in contrast, if the NFL, even though it would be in late January or early February, so it would never happen anyway, if the NFL talked about bringing the Pro Bowl to Baltimore, I would just be like, a flag football game? Like, what are we doing here?
Move over to the convention center and have them sign autographs.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
I'll play paper football.
Do a gala instead with a big banquet and do it, charitable ties, all that. So Major League Baseball still has a game. It's still mostly, ugly uniforms aside, resembles the game. It's not perfect. Pitchers have only gone an inning or two for, since I was a kid.
Dude, I was in Milwaukee the night Bud Selig went.
Well, that was such a fiasco. However, I will maintain, and they've since corrected that, obviously, they made a mistake going in the opposite direction of
this
making
one really
it where
counts.
Home field, and suddenly you had some guy for the last place Orioles or the last place Tampa Bay Devil Rays deciding who was going to have home field advantage. I mean, that wasn't the right solution either, but that was such a imperfect storm of circumstances that led to that. But the All-Star game, I'm okay with it. I'm at peace with the idea that it's just not going to be what it was in 1994, let alone 1974 or 1964. I mean, it's just a different environment in which they play. But for the most part, players show up. Players are willing to play. It's a little tricky with the pitching side of things, obviously. And that's where if I have a concern for the game itself, it's pitching injuries and the health of pitchers, and that being such a talking point, I do wonder what the future of the game is long term.
You're a religious man. Do you pray as Deacon Jones on Sunday for the health of Grayson Rodriguez and Corbin Burns? You better start. This is a summer we need some divine intervention.
I tend to pray for more important things, but sure.
There's nothing more important than our number one starter.
Don't
look into that camera and tell the audience there's anything more important.
I've said it. We've talked about it, and we're not going to bring up the details of.
Well, if somebody else gets hurt, we'll have to talk about it again. So
that's the big thing. I mean, at this point in time, they're kind of back to where they were last year in terms of it was Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez. Now it's Burns and Grayson Rodriguez, and obviously no Bradish. But boy, you need another arm, and you just hope, you pray. I just said it, pray. So there you go.
All right, we're praying.
But to keep those guys healthy. There's no
So we're at
question.
Costas. Luke is here. We're doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. There's been no crab cakes in this segment, but we are about to retire to the bar to watch the Orioles and the Yankees. You'll have the outcome of that whenever you listen to this. And Luke and I will be after it all weekend with Houston and obviously Cleveland next week. You've been to Costas before?
Yeah, I've been to Costas a few times.
You
over
were
the years.
here for maybe the Cup of Super Bowl, or no? You came out.
I was here for, I believe.
No, you did Pappas that week, didn't you? Didn't you come up?
Oh yeah,
I'm talking about February.
I've been here a few times.
But you haven't done the show with me here, right? We haven't done the show together here, I don't think.
The last.
So I just don't know what you eat here.
I'm thinking.
I'm trying to figure out what you're getting on the.
Didn't we do? Leading up to Super Bowl 47, didn't we do a show here with Bryant McKinney?
That's when you
I was
with my mother.
And you got
my
that
mother was here.
Awesome picture of your mom. God rest her soul, and Bryant McKinney.
Coolest, right here, dude.
One of the coolest pictures ever.
Right here.
I mean, it's right up there with seeing Andre the Giant next to Mean Gene Okerlund. It
really is. The picture of my mother with Bryant McKinney here. My mother was alive. It looks like something out of one of those carnivals from 100 years ago, where the world's biggest man and the world's smallest lady are in the same picture. Like that Ludlow guy that was 8 feet tall with the midget. It looks like that. Like Eddie Goodell or Eddie Goodell batting, next to Ted Kluszewski or something. I don't know.
Or the more recent picture, it was Aaron Judge next to Jose Altuve, which and the foreground was a little wonky, but yeah, Aaron Judge looks like he's twice as tall.
It looks
as
like
Jose
Altuve can fit in his pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
My mother looks like she could fit in Brian McKinney's pocket.
Oh, yeah.
So Luke has been here. He is of Essex soil and heritage with some Dundalk cousins mixed in, I think, as well. What are you getting? You
I don't know. I mean,
is there seafood you don't eat, or do I not know about this?
I'm not like oysters and clams.
You're not. See, I thought you seem like a little picky
I'm much more crab. Shrimp, of course.
I am going to get today.
I love scallops.
You love scallops.
Scallops I really like.
I didn't know that.
Those are my main three. I eat some fish too. I'm not. It's not like I won't try other stuff, but those are my go-tos.
Here's what I'm ordering when we get off, because I had a Greek salad this morning. I had the fried shrimp, which are my favorite. I had that for lunch. I haven't had any crab, nothing during the show. I've been doing radio for 3 hours. I'm waiting on the game, waiting on you. I'm going to get us some crab imperial stuffed mushrooms, and then I'm going to get – I had some oysters Rockefeller too, because we're doing the oyster tour. And then I'm going to get a bowl of soup. But the one thing that I haven't had in a couple of years is just some old-fashioned steamed shrimp, Old Bay onions, and beer. I'm going to peel them.
That's a good choice.
Peel and eat. We're going to get ice-cold draft beer, Mr. Costas. He always wants to buy me free beer here, and I always turn him down. I'm taking your free beer today at Costas. So we're here at Costas. It's all brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. The Gold Rush Sevens, doublers. Luke Jones is here. Big appreciation to Chris Emery. I got to rock and roll from 100.7 The Bay, my friend who lives here in Edgemere. And, of course, I did an hour with Jessica Vallis. I keep saying Hartford Design. She now has a new group, the CCC, which you can hear in our audio vault as well. She has put together our all-new BaltimorePositive.com website. Still has ellipses on the excerpts. I'm pissed about that. She knows that. The ellipses are going to go away. So by the time you find it, the website will be exactly the way we want it. Then we're going to get the mobile right. Then we're going to launch the app. We have a lot of things to do around here and a lot of new sponsors to do them with. Our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping our water clean. Wise Markets with us again for another annual deal, as is the Maryland Lottery and our sponsorship there. And one of our newer sponsors, but one of our older sponsors, Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, with us for all of the Maryland Crab Cake Tours. Tuesday, we're firing it up near where I live, up in Parkville. We're going to be at Pappas in Parkville from 2 until 5 on Friday. I've got some great guests coming out. I've been chasing Barry Stitz, former Baltimore Blast superstar athletic director at Archbishop Curley and the Mighty Friars. They have a major league kid playing for the Mariners now. The Curley graduates, Friar alums. So Stitz is going to join me. He's been ducking me for a couple of years. We played Little League together. He was playing shortstop the night Richie Pass struck me out on the 3-2 outside pitch that forced us. We lost the World Series that year. It was my fault. You wonder why I am the way I am. 45 years later, 1978. Mr. Butch thinks it's because I swam in the pool that day. I wore myself out,
Gotta watch out.
It was low and outside, I'm telling you.
Just like
Frank
just
Robinson.
what Mickey told Rocky before the big fight against Apollo.
Just what I told Frank Robinson. Luke Jones can be found at Baltimore Luke. I can be found anywhere the good internet travels. We would encourage you to check out our 25th anniversary documentary. Especially the best part comes around like minute 22 when Luke appears for about 4 minutes and comes into my life. So you can check that out at BaltimorePositive.com. Big thanks to our friends at Costas for feeding us, drinking us, treating us right in air-conditioned comfort before they bring all the crabs out here. It's 100 degrees outside, but it is ready for Oriole baseball to beat the New York Yankees here. Back for more on WNST. We are BaltimorePositive.com. Stay with us.